Today, we must be extremely efficient because we've been invited here to a very wet and rainy France to drive a late prototype of the Alpine A390, but we only have 1 hour with the car. This is electrifying as it happens, but what you really want to know is how it drives. It's good. It's really, really good. Oh, and don't forget to like and subscribe.
The following takes place between 1 and 2 p.m. on the day of the Alpine A390 prototype drive. Duh.
Okay, so I've had 2 croissants, 2 coffees and a brief chat with the engineers, and I just want to do a quick recap. Alpine is a sister company to Renault, and it does a really lovely line in 2-seat sports cars with the A110, and it does a hot take on the Renault 5 called the A290. And this is the A390, so it's Alpine's more practical SUV type thing. Although this car really isn't an SUV when you stand next to it. Now, Alpine calls it a sport fastback, and you can kind of see it. Now, the A390 is a bigger, more practical thing. It's a 5-seat car, but it's actually quite low. It's more like a lifted all-road type thing. But this is on the Ampere platform, which basically means underneath there is technically a Megane or a Scenic, or actually a Nissan Ariya, but it doesn't look like any of those. Now, Nicola has already done a video, full lowdown on this car, so if you want to know more, go and watch that. But I just wanted to run through a couple of things, because it does look pretty much like they said it would. If you look at the front, it's got a very triangular theme going on. It's actually got an air blade here, which runs out and over the bonnet, which means it's less bluff-fronted than it actually appears. It's got these sort of triangular LED lights which kind of waterfall down the front, and then again sort of a triangular theme around the air vents and a very thin kind of scowly face. As you come down the side, you've got either 20 or 21 inch wheels depending on the spec, some nice deep side bodies, and if you notice, it's got a black roof and then a black bit along here that comes up over the wheel arches, which keeps the body side looking fairly slim. It looks a little bit more lithe than it actually is. Come to the back, you've got this. It's a fastback, so it's got a taller part of the roof that comes all the way back down here to a ducktail spoiler, and then a full width light bar with a big lit Alpine thing. It's actually quite neat, but it doesn't look like an SUV, and I think that's what Alpine was going for. If you think this is going up against the likes of the Audi Q6 e-tron or Porsche Macan, I definitely think the Alpine has its own thing going on. And when you get inside, you do recognise some of the Renault stuff if you've been in a Megane or a Scenic. So you have a 12.3-inch driver's display directly in front of you, and then a portrait-orientated sort of 12-inch display, which is slightly canted towards you, though it does have physical controls for the heating and various air conditioning things on the bottom, which I really like. Then in the middle, there's a kind of this big central spa with some storage underneath, wireless charging, gear selector, and there's a bit more in here. Then, directly in front of you is an Alpine steering wheel. Now, it has a few other functions which you don't get on Renaults. So there's a little blue knob down here which controls the recuperative braking. There's 3 different settings for that. There's a drive mode selector here, which you can go from normal, track, all the usual stuff, individual. And then there's an overtaking sort of boost button up here. It feels much different to some of the Renault stuff. So it's a bit more of a cocoon, a little bit more driver focused. But it's also quite odd because it's not a very tall car. It just feels a little bit lifted, a little bit like an A110 on stilts, which is exactly what Alpine were trying to do. And even though Alpine is seen as a more sporty rather than luxury brand, higher spec A390s will get these really rather lovely electric, adjustable and massaging seats, and lots of little things like 13 speaker stereos, all the kind of little luxe things that you don't usually get in a sporting manufacturer. The rear seats aren't the biggest, and that coupe-ish roofline does cut into rear space, but it's generally fine. Also, it's got a decent 513 litre boot, but no frunk.
Anyway, just a bit of housekeeping. We know you're not all looking for a brand spanking new Alpine, but Electrifying has built its own marketplace for used brilliance, where you can find all the useful details about battery warranties and all that good stuff. So if you want to buy with peace of mind, scan the QR code on the screen to browse.
Okay, so this is my initial, very first impressions, and It's a strange one because the steering is very, very light. But also the car feels strangely weightless. Like the way it's making itself move down the road is very like a lightweight sports car. I mean, it's got that instant electric hit, but just from the steering, look how fast it reacts to the steering. That's bonkers. And it feels like there's not a lot of mass in it, and that's weird for an electric car because usually they feel quite heavy. This actually feels quite different to a lot of EVs that I've driven, and that's just in the first 10 minutes of driving it. And it rides really well so far. These are French back roads, and I have to say they're probably not the best tended in the world. And there's a few speed bumps, and look how it rides. So Alpine's very good at doing decent ride. The cars absorb bumps well, which makes them confidence inspiring when you're going down a bumpy road quite quickly. And this one has that Alpine feeling.
The word that keeps popping into my head is playful. Alpine reckons that the idea was to make this electric SUV feel more or less like the two-seat A110 combustion-powered sports car, and you can really see where they've got that vibe. But the steering is very sharp to give you that feeling, at least in this prototype, and that might be just a bit direct for more daily use SUVs. But the body control is brilliant, the brakes are strong, and it's got loads of character, which is what we want from our electric cars. It doesn't all need to be about acceleration, they can be fun actually going round corners too, and the Alpine feels like an Alpine.
So there'll be two versions, the GT and the GTS. And the GT gets 396 brake horsepower and the GTS gets 463. Now the faster of the two will hit 62 miles an hour in just 3.9 seconds, so under 4, which is plenty quick. And the slightly slower version will still do it in 4.8. So that's more than enough for daily use. But the interesting thing about this car is not necessarily how fast it is, though it is plenty quick. It's the way that it puts its power and torque to the ground, because this Alpine has a triple motor setup. So it's got one electric motor in the front and then two electric motors in the back, and they're all independently controlled. And that allows for more sophisticated torque vectoring. Now that sounds a bit science fiction, but all it means is that you can millimetrically control each rear wheel independently and then also the front axle. So you can make the car behave differently depending on what kind of corner you're in, what kind of load you've got, where the yaw is. So if you want to make, say, the car tuck in a little bit more, with a little bit more alacrity so it feels more sporty, you can overspeed an outside wheel and actually slow down an inside wheel on the back axle to make the nose come round quicker, and then you can make the front axle drag the front of the car around. It'll make it feel more sporty and more reactive. But it's doing this by overspeeding that outside wheel. Now some of these systems actually use the brakes to do it, so they're basically dragging an inside wheel, but the Alpine version is a bit more proactive. What it does is make the A390 weirdly feel much lighter than it is. I figure this car feels about 250 kilos lighter than it actually weighs. So it's still quite a hefty thing with an 89 kilowatt hour battery. It's 2.1 tons, and I think it feels more like, I don't know, 1800. All of that clever torque vectoring is coming together to make this feel more like a sports car than an SUV. And it's not necessarily about how fast it is, it's about how interesting it is to drive. Alpine should be interesting. They don't need to be the ultimate fastest car, but they should be amusing.
Regardless of whether you get a GT or a GTS, the A390 comes with an 89 kWh battery giving up to 345 miles of WLTP range, but only when you have the smaller 20-inch wheels. With the 21-inch alloys, the range drops to 323 miles. The entirely French-made lithium-ion NMC battery supports 400-volt DC fast charging at up to 190 kilowatts, allowing a 15 to 80% charge in 25 minutes. And it's got bi-directional charging too, so you'll be able to charge an e-bike or drop power back into the grid if you're so equipped. Which is a little bit of future-proofing. And yep, they all get a heat pump, battery conditioning and an app.
Do you know what? This gives me confidence. Because if you can make a car that weighs this much, this weighs 2.1 tons and it feels so reactive, imagine what it will be like when Alpine gets its hands on some lighter batteries. Because then if you've got half the battery weight and twice the power density, and this kind of setup, this torque vectoring setup where you can make a tall car feel very stable and very light, they're going to be in the right place to make some really exciting electric sports cars that satisfy drivers. I mean, I'm not a big fan of the SUV, but this is a really good one. And they say this is a prototype, but I think this is very late stage. I can't figure out much that's wrong with it. The only things I'd possibly criticise is that it has got quite light steering, extremely light steering, and I think it could be a little bit more, have a little bit more weight to it, just to give it a bit more positivity. So, the Alpine A390. I think it's a really interesting one. I know that we haven't had much time in the car and it has been absolutely awful conditions, but this is genuinely something unique. I think Alpine has managed to make a car that feels like an Alpine, even though it's an SUV-ish kind of big electric thing. If you want something different, this is going to start at £60,000 for the GT and go to £70,000 roughly for the GTS. The thing that I find most fascinating about it is that it's genuinely unique in the space. It's hard to make an electric SUV feel like that. And I think they've done a really good job.